Guten Morgen, meine Damen und Herren. Kaiser David Traylor von dem Firma, bei dem Firma Golden Eagle Partners von USA. So, a couple things. So I think I have my name tag somewhere. If I don't find it, if you guys want to talk to me later on, just look for me. I'm the person with the black eye and the funny shoes. So one thing I want to talk about is the future dynamics of the global cannabis industry. And a couple things, if you want to go ahead on the next slide, is looking at talking about the future. I want to look at a retrospective. Awesome, thank you, appreciate it. Looking at the future, I think a retrospective is always important. But before that, I wanted to talk to you a little bit about my background. So I have 2 science degrees, biochemistry and molecular biology. I worked for 15 years in leading biotech companies in Boulder, Berlin, Germany here. Silicon Valley. I have inventorship on 3 US patents, 15 years investment banking, 31 transactions or assignments in biotech, and then got into cannabis 8+ years ago. So we've been working in North America for 8 years, internationally for 6+ years. We have 25 transactions or assignments done in cannabis. If you know Athletes for Care, I've been an athlete ambassador for Athletes for Care. And then also I've been 1+ year as the chairman of their scientific advisory council, doing some very interesting things as far as TBI. And then I've spoken on cannabis in 29 events from certainly here in Frankfurt, Davos, Dubai, Grand Cayman, Toronto, and obviously around the US. One thing that we always like to talk about when we're talking about cannabis is the fact that we don't believe that there's really any crystal ball. So it's kind of funny. I was thinking coming up here trying to talk about what we see as the future. One thing we do say as far as cannabis goes, the most predictable thing about cannabis is its unpredictability. So frankly speaking, most of what I'll say here and in the next few minutes probably is going to be wrong. Frankly. Maybe if I'm lucky, some will be right, but at the very least, what I'd like to do is get you guys to think about, from your own perspective, what are some of the seminal events that I'm going to go through in the historically, which ones you would name, and then also think about some of the things that you guys believe might happen. I want it to be kind of certainly interactive, and I'd love to get some take after this is over. We have a break if anybody has any questions. That think I'm wrong at certain things or I'm right in certain things. So one thing I think that's important, though, this industry is so crazy in the fact that the nomenclature's screwed up, frankly. So coming from a biochemistry background, cannabis is the genus, right? Full stop. So we believe cannabis should actually encompass the entire amazing plant that this is. Because, you know, actually here in the US, right, or back in the US, marijuana is a derogatory term, but if you look at the FDA tends to use that in the regulatory auspices and how they go about things. But obviously some people believe that that's a negative term. And then obviously you have people referring to cannabis as marijuana, and then you have hemp. So from our perspective, the best thing to do is look at it as probably a THC plus and a THC minus. Those are the easiest ways to break this out. And again, I'd love to get anybody's take on that. So obviously everybody knows here that this goes back to, you know, hundreds of years before Christ. But, you know, if you want to look at cannabis as far as the modern, cannabis is really the modern industry. Obviously, everybody knows Rafi Mechoulam, you know, elucidated the structure of THC, Delta-9 THC in 1964. California did have an initiative in 1972. It did not pass. The elucidation of the endocannabinoid system, so many of you know, we've had that system in our bodies for hundreds of millions of years, and not only, we just found it in 1993. And then, as you may know, California really kicked things off in 1996 when they essentially approved medical THC plus or medical marijuana. And then also in Berlin in 1997, we had the first hemp parade. So again, looking at these are not all the seminal events in cannabis. And again, I'd love to have you guys think of some of the ones that you think are really important. But there is a reason why I picked some of these, and part of it is the temporal issue of cannabis. We're in 2022 right now, And if you look back on the amount of time that's gone past since some of these events. So everybody knows that in UK, they essentially moved it to Class C 2004, then they moved it to Class B. Again, this kind of speaks to kind of the craziness of what goes on in this cannabis industry. California ballot initiative to legalize marijuana, THC plus, defeated in 2010. And then where I'm from in Colorado and Washington really kicked things off with adult use. The voters approving that in November 2012. And then, as you know, Uruguay became the first country to legalize full stop cannabis, or essentially THC and marijuana, in December of 2013. And then the first year of adult use in Colorado, $680 million plus in revenue. So again, this kind of speaks to one of the points I want to make a little later, because that in itself is a somewhat rare occurrence when you have a new market launch in cannabis. So the first German import license for Canadian flower was issued to Medcan. That was back in summer of 2016. And then Canada's Senate approved the national use of medical marijuana, THC plus, in about the same time in June 2018. And then, as you guys know, one of the seminal transactions that happened in the industry was Constellation upped their ownership and put in $4 billion into canopy growth. And then the medical use of cannabis is legalized in the United Kingdom. And then finally, Aurora Cannabis acquires Farmacias Magistrales in Mexico in 2018. And I think that's one of the things I want to make a point of is in 2018, again, we're talking 4 years ago, and you see some of the seminal events that happened, especially transactionally in this industry, over 4 years ago now. So we had, everything, kind of moving in fits and starts, and then all of a sudden you have the pandemic. I think one of the things, and again, I'd be interested, trying to take a global perspective, I'd love to hear the feedback from some of you in the audience as far as how it impacted your industry and your geography. But as far as my perspective and looking around, certainly the U.S. and globally, it was a positive benefit. First and foremost, it was declared, not in every state, but it was declared an essential business in Colorado and a number of states, not in Massachusetts, but certainly that had an impact. As a matter of fact, when it was in Denver, the mayor of Denver declared alcohol and marijuana not to be essential businesses in middle of March 2020, and within 6 hours, he's changed his stance because he realized how stupid that was. One other thing that's really interesting, and I can, if you guys want, I can show you the reference. A peer-reviewed article showed actually that the consumption of tobacco and cannabis went up in Europe and alcohol went down, and that was actually a study done in the first few months of the pandemic. Recognition of CBD by European Commission as a food product, everybody knows that in 2020. But also the interesting thing in Colorado, as I mentioned, if you really look at the data, in the pandemic, the total sales, both medical and adult use in Colorado, went up over 25% from 2019 to 2020. And then also, we had a client based in Israel that had some data. There's another Israeli-based company that did some initial results using CBD. And as you may know, steroids were a big treatment for treating COVID-2 virus patients or COVID patients. And so those data, that data was released in late 2020. So after the pandemic, post-pandemic, 2021 on, so then where's that put us? This is the last 2 years, right? So this is the last slide that I want to talk about maybe where it's going to put us. Peak of public cannabis valuations for MSOs and LPs really did peak of spring of last year. I think GTI, Green Thumb, is really the only company that didn't occur. That was later last year. As many of you know, Sanity, based out of Berlin, closed a $44 million round June of last year. And then certainly that was followed by a raise of Dutchy in the U.S. for $350 million with a valuation of almost $4 billion. Obviously, that valuation is not going to be what it is then, what it is now. And then also certainly Dr. Reddy's Labs, one of the leading pharma companies internationally, as you know, out of India, did the Nimbus Health deal. That was announced earlier this year. And then one thing I think that was really interesting, at least in the States, and this also gets to one of the points I'd like to make, the Ninth Circuit Court of Appeals in California just a few weeks ago ruled that Delta-8 THC is actually legal under the Farm Bill, so it's nationally legal, whereas a number of states in the U.S. have been outlawing Delta-8 THC. So I just have 2 slides remaining on this, but a couple points I wanted to make. And again, I'd love to get your feedback in the next 2 days on whether you think this is right or wrong. But certainly having a global perspective, geographies usually take much longer than expected, as I mentioned. That's the reason why I mentioned the Colorado data, because that's very unusual. I mean, for example, for me, we can count on one hand the geographies that really launched as quickly as people thought they did. At least in the U.S., you have Nevada, Colorado, adult use maybe in Illinois. Certainly Portugal, Spain, UK have not really rolled out as quickly as everybody expected to, and I think we also saw that information in some of the other previous presentations. One thing I think that's going to be interesting here in the next couple months, in the next year, is the question of this financial malaise, if you want to put it that way. How long is that going to last? And our perspective is, coming from biotechnology, you would see this from the 80s and 90s. In a new industry like biotechnology was in the 80s and 90s, you had some very catalytic and non-catalytic events, frankly, in biotech, because a lot of the investors didn't understand biotechnology. So you'd have maybe an event that did mean something, but the investors didn't really quite appreciate that. And I think cannabis is kind of the same way. Is like, that's our perspective. What happened in the U.S. is you still have a lot of retail investors involved, and when when the government didn't fully legalize it last year, I think a lot of investors were miffed. They didn't understand the industry, and so sold everything off. But that gets to my next point, is I think the rotation from retail investors to institutional investors, like, the Fidelities and the Vanguards. I mean, if you look at a lot of the cap tables in these companies, these big institutional investors do not have large stakes in a lot of the U.S. companies. They have a couple of stakes in some of the Canadian LPs. But when you start seeing more institutional money come in, you start seeing the legalization, you see the stigma starting to change. I think you're going to have more activity from the larger money, which is obviously going to help the industry. And then obviously, come from the science side, I'm biased, but notwithstanding the entourage effect, we believe that's certainly something that's real. But, we believe it's all becoming about molecules. I mean, Delta-8 THC is a classic example. Delta-8 THC is an isomer, right, of Delta-9. Now you have people talking about Delta-10. We actually have a client that's producing CBNs, cannabinol, with an acetyl group. So that's one thing that, companies, I'm sure people are doing it over here too, right? Including increasing the PK and PD by adding acetyl groups, or you have something like HHC, hexahydrocannabinol. That's one of our clients is producing that too, right? And then finally, a couple other guesses on the future. And again, this is really meant to be looking at this not from a North American lens. I mean, frankly, that's one of the problems we see, and that's one of the reasons why I'm here, is if you are in North America, you still have I wouldn't say arrogance, but a view that North America is really where it's at, and we believe that's one reason why we're here, that the global industry started years ago, and it's going to only continue. And frankly, if the North American operators don't watch it, they're probably already getting their ass handed to them, right? So one of the quick questions we like to ask is, where is it going to be cultivated? Frankly, I mean, maybe some here in Germany, but in the last 6 months, we've talked to groups out of Canary Islands. You got Jersey, you got Guernsey. We talked to a group out of Cyprus. You got Greece, Colombia. I mean, we talked to one of the leading companies out of Colombia, and the CEO is like, I'm not sure how we're going to deal with the economics coming out of Lesotho. So then you have South Africa. So, or maybe Portugal, right? So I think that's one of the questions, and frankly, we don't know the answer. We're pretty educated as far as what's going on, but again, getting back to the most predictable thing about cannabis is its unpredictability. And then let's get even more crazy. How's it going to be cultivated or produced? And again, we like to use the term produced because we believe there's what we call alternative production methods, or APMs, because coming from a biotech background, you have now companies that are using E. coli bacteria. You have companies using yeast. You have companies just using chemistry. And then you have companies doing the combination thereof, where they're creating, like I got an email last year, it was really crazy, where somebody's saying, hey, we've got THC, Delta-9 THC for you. We grew up a bunch of CBD, hemp outdoors, just did a simple chemical conversion to Delta-9, and we're selling it. And then, of course, now you're going around the regulations. So then that whole thing is a really good question, because where's that going to head? And actually our thought is, and I think you guys would probably mostly agree, the method that produces the highest quality cannabinoid at the lowest price is probably going to be the winner, right? And then obviously being in Europe, one of the questions is, what will be the role of sustainability? So I was just on many of you guys may know CanMed, which is this science-based conference that happens in Pasadena every year, and I was on a panel talking about cultivation sustainability. I mean, certainly being from Colorado and the Colorado River and everything else, water is becoming a huge deal. Obviously, the food production over time, we need to improve on that. Horticulture technologies need to be improved. We're working with one of the leading LED light horticulture cannabis companies. So where's that going to go? And again, we don't have all the answers, but certainly, as you know, sustainability's got to get better in this industry, because the carbon footprint that we have, especially for indoor grow operations, is not ideal. And then one last final question, again, I think that really is getting not enough consideration, is really what is going to be the biggest market globally? Is it going to be, and again, I like to use THC plus and THC minus, is it going to be adult use? Is it going to be medical? Is it going to be industrial hemp? Frankly speaking, and you guys may be surprised, I don't think adult use THC plus or marijuana is going to be the biggest market globally. I think it's going to be medical. Obviously, I'm biased coming from biotech, but then you also have people, the people we're talking to in Mongolia. What a better place to produce hemp than Mongolia, like where it originally began. So again, we don't have all the answers on that, but certainly industrial hemp, it's going to be very interesting how this all plays out. And obviously, what I started out talking about, the most predictable thing about this industry is unpredictability. So thank you.